In addition to being a lifelong Batman fan, I'm also a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes. Though at first glance, the two may seem very different, if you think about it, they actually have a lot in common. They're each among the most immediately recognizable characters in all of fiction. They've each been adapted countless times from their original works to virtually every other medium there is. They're both detectives. In fact, they have each been described as the world's greatest detective. Holmes came first by several decades and was already among the most influential characters in popular fiction when Batman debuted in the late 1930s, and you can see the influence Holmes had on Batman at multiple points. Batman's scientific methods of operation and his essentially naturalistic, evidence-based view of the world. Batman's predilection for disguises, Batman's working with a sidekick, Batman's single-minded obsession with his crusade against crime. Those aspects don't appear in every version of Batman, but they do pop up pretty frequently, and they can all be traced back to Holmes. I'm not really saying anything new here. If you know even a little bit about Batman or Holmes, this probably doesn't surprise you. What might surprise you, however, is the fact that Batman and Sherlock Holmes once worked on a case together. Well, sort of. I'll explain what I mean. It all happens in the pages of Detective Comics number 572, the March 1987 issue, written by Mike W. Barr, with art by pencilers Alan Davis, Terry Beatty, Carmine Infantino, and E.R. Cruz, and inkers Dick Giordano and Al Vey, plus a special double-page poster by the legendary Dick Sprang. Why so many artists? Why a poster? Because issue number 572 is the 50th anniversary edition of Detective Comics. That's why. And this baby is a 54-page special. The story, told in 5 chapters, is titled The Doomsday Book. Chapter 1 opens not on Batman, but on another comic book detective who debuted in the 1930s, Slam Bradley. Appropriate, since Slam Bradley debuted in Detective Comics number 1. Over 2 years before old pointy ears over there showed up and kinda took over the book. Another fun fact, Slam Bradley was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the same duo who, I hope I don't need to tell you, also created Superman. Speaking of Superman, and Batman, and all of the similar characters who followed in the wake of their success, if you ever get a chance, check out Detective Comics number 1. It hasn't been reprinted a ton, but you can find it online, trust me. As you might expect from the title, it includes assorted flavors of detective stories, some that mix in adventure fiction, some that are more hard-boiled, some that are funny. One is a Western. It's a fascinating glimpse into what comic books were like in the era before superheroes came along and changed the medium forever. Anyway, Slam Bradley. He returns to his office after having a drink one night. It's nearly Christmas. And he meets a new client, Thomas Morgan, a young man from London who wants Slam to find his fiancée, who he believes has been kidnapped and brought here to Gotham City. As they're talking, a gang of Uzi-wielding gunmen burst in and attempt to kill them, but Slam and Morgan are able to flee down the fire escape. They end up cornered in an alley, but luckily, Batman and Robin swing into their rescue. Batman says, "What say we stuff some stockings, Robin?" And Robin replies, "You'll bet, Batman!" It's Jason Todd. It's 1987. Cut him some slack. He'll be dead soon. Batman, Robin, and Slam take out most of the gang, but one gunman manages to grab Morgan as a hostage and get away. Batman mentions something about Commissioner Gordon getting a tip from London about these guys, and he tells Robin their next move is to head to London themselves to hopefully find and rescue Morgan and get to the bottom of all this. Batman thanks Slam for his help, but says, "We'll take it from here." Slam doesn't see it that way, though, and he privately decides to continue looking into the case here in Gotham, while Batman and Robin set off across the Atlantic. In Chapter 2, suspecting the abduction of Morgan and Morgan's fiancée are related to the IRA somehow, Slam asks around at a series of Irish bars until finally hitting pay dirt and learning that Morgan's fiancée has been taken across the river to Gotham Island. Slam finds her, frees her from her captors, an effort that involves shooting one of the captors and setting the rest of them on fire with gasoline. Also, he punches one because I guess blowing up a can of gas right in his face wasn't enough to stop him. I don't approve of the guy's criminal activities, but I respect his determination. Once they're away, the fiancée tells Slam that her fiancé's name isn't actually Thomas Morgan, it's Thomas Moriarty. He changed it because he's ashamed of the Moriarty name and what it stands for. Her name is Mary Watson. I don't get it. Do you get it? Chapter 3 begins, and we're in London following the Elongated Man. Why not? He's a private dick too. It's the anniversary of Detective Comics after all. Why shouldn't it be a dick party? Which it totally is. Do you see Miss Marple or Nancy Drew around? Anyway, the Elongated Man is in London to meet with the caretaker at Sherlock Holmes's old flat at 221B Baker Street about a recently discovered, unpublished manuscript by Dr. Watson. Just as the Elongated Man arrives, someone takes a shot at the caretaker, old Mr. Wade, through the window using an air gun, the same air gun used against Holmes himself by associates of Professor Moriarty in The Adventure of the Empty House. Which really happened. It's nonfiction. Within this story, which is fiction. In our actual nonfiction world, it's all fiction. You know what? Doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. The Elongated Man stretches up to the sitting room of 221B to check on Wade, who is wounded but still alive, when a gang bursts through the door, led by this guy, the great-grandnephew of Professor Moriarty. He's come looking for that lost manuscript too, but he doesn't want to read it. He wants to burn it. The gang fights with the Elongated Man, knocks him out, ransacks the place, and when they can't find the manuscript, Moriarty decides to hell with it. I'll just set the whole place on fire. And that's what Moriarty does. Then he and his goons leave. Fortunately, Slam Bradley and Mary Watson are in town, and they notice 221B on fire. They run upstairs, pull Wade to safety, and help the no longer unconscious Elongated Man put out the fire. Then they locate the lost manuscript, hidden by Wade inside a gasogene, a device used to make carbonated water, which belonged to Sherlock Holmes. After making sure old Mr. Wade is okay, Slam Bradley, Mary Watson, and the Elongated Man head back to the Elongated Man's hotel to read the lost Sherlock Holmes manuscript. Lucky for us, we get to read the lost manuscript too. In comic book form, it's Chapter 4 of the story, titled The Adventure of the Red Leech. It's 1886, and Dr. Watson returns to Baker Street to find Holmes being consulted by a certain Dr. Nigel Brewster. What's Dr. Brewster's problem? After Holmes deduces a series of private details about his life based on superficial observations of his appearance and behavior, just to remind Brewster and us who the fuck we're dealing with, Brewster explains that he fears he's losing his mind. Recently, one of the other doctors in his office told him he enjoyed the night they'd spent out at the club with their wives. Only problem, Brewster has absolutely no memory of this. But his wife, he's a newlywed by the way, confirms that they did go out to the club with this other doctor and his wife, and this same sort of thing has happened 3 times. With no history of dementia in his family, Brewster is at a loss to explain why this is happening to him all of a sudden. He doesn't want to consult his fellow doctors about it because apparently they're all a bunch of backstabbing assholes, and if one of them found out about this, it might jeopardize his position as one of Queen Victoria's medical staff. Holmes tells Brewster not to worry, he'll look into it, and as he shows Brewster to the door, Holmes says, "Oh yeah, by the way, what did you say your wife's name was?" And Brewster says, "Patty of the Chicago Crosbys." Holmes is like, "Okay, neat, thanks for sharing, now get lost." Holmes conducts an investigation which consists of sending a telegram to Chicago and then sitting around and smoking for an entire day, so pretty standard Holmes investigative methodology. Then he wakes Watson up early in the morning and says, "Get dressed, we've got a train to catch." They take a train to Dr. Brewster's place, and on the way, Holmes explains that he got a response from his telegram, which he sent to a friend on the Chicago police, who informed him that Patty of the Chicago Crosbys died in a train accident last year. That means Brewster's wife is not who she claims to be. Holmes also shares with Watson his supposition that this case somehow involves a secret criminal mastermind whose presence Holmes has long suspected in the London underworld. I don't know his name, Holmes says, but I know his scent. Holmes and Watson sneak into the Brewster place, where they find Mrs. Brewster, whoever she is, tending to Dr. Brewster in the bedroom. Once she leaves, Holmes and Watson slip into the bedroom and discover that Brewster is in a coma and has a big old red leech on his chest. Watson tosses the leech into the fire, but a couple of goons discover Holmes and Watson's presence and charge in. Holmes knocks one out and Watson blasts the other with his revolver, but then the imposter Patty Brewster appears holding a shotgun. She says her husband was only a pawn in their plan and that the professor would want her to kill Holmes and Watson, so that's what she's gonna do. Before she can pull the trigger, Holmes pulls the rug out from under her, literally, and as she falls, she gives the ceiling both barrels of the shotgun, which causes a chandelier to crash onto her and kill her. Well, that's nice and tidy. But no time to waste. Holmes tells Watson they have to catch a carriage to Buckingham Palace immediately. There's some game still afoot. They reach the palace just in time to stop an imposter Dr. Brewster from examining the Queen and putting one of those red leeches on her. The plan, as Holmes explains later back at Baker Street, was for the fake Patty Crosby to incapacitate the real Dr. Brewster so that the fake Dr. Brewster could put that leech on Queen Victoria and take her out of commission, which would enable highly placed allies of that criminal mastermind Holmes mentioned before to take control of the British government while the Queen was ailing. Because they don't know who the mastermind is and can't prove that any of the conspirators were working for him, Holmes tells Watson not to publish his account of this case. Just then, a rock smashes through the window carrying a note, from the criminal mastermind presumably, warning Holmes to stop being such a goody-goody and just let him do his crimes. Holmes says, "The world isn't big enough for both of us. I sense I shall face this mastermind again. And when that happens, it will be quite the problem. Perhaps even the final problem." So that's the Lost Manuscript. Chapter 5, Batman. Remember Batman? He's in London with Robin, and he meets up with Slam Bradley, Mary Watson, and the Elongated Man. Batman reads the Lost Holmes manuscript and deduces that Moriarty's descendant, the bad one who tried to burn down Baker Street, not the good one who changed his name and is engaged to Mary Watson, wants to use the same plan his great-granduncle, criminal mastermind Professor James Moriarty, tried to pull off in 1886 and poison the royal family with leeches. Queen Elizabeth, remember her, is dedicating a museum at Grimsby Castle tonight. Plus, Batman overheard some crooks in a bar earlier saying some shit that makes him suspect Moriarty also has something planned to go down at a military base at Greenham Common. The group splits up. Batman heads to Grimsby Castle to protect the Queen, and everyone else speeds off to Greenham Common. That second group, Slam Bradley, Elongated Man, Mary Watson, and Robin, arrive at Greenham Common in time to stop Edgar Moriarty, the bad one, from launching a missile filled with deadly nerve gas at London. Well, technically, they don't stop the launch. Robin and the Elongated Man grab onto the missile as it launches and manage to disarm it before jumping safely back to Earth, Robin using Ralph as a parachute, because that's a thing you can do when you're a super stretchy person. Mary and Thomas Moriarty, who Edgar Moriarty brought along to serve as a patsy, are reunited. Edgar is captured, and all's well that ends well. Except for the rest of it, which hasn't ended yet. Over at Grimsby Castle, Queen Elizabeth is nearly blown up by a bomb planted in a fancy new edition of the Doomsday Book, a record of a historic property survey from the time of King William the Conqueror. After Batman prevents the Queen from being harmed by the bomb, he exposes the event's head of security, Inspector Foxborough, as an agent of Edgar Moriarty and the man who planted the bomb. Foxborough makes a run for it, but he's thrown to the ground by a mysterious figure standing in the doorway. A mysterious figure who is revealed to be Sherlock Holmes. Batman is amazed, as are Slam, Ralph, Mary, Thomas, and Robin, who all arrive on the scene a moment later. And amazed they should be. This story takes place at Christmas time 1986, which would make Holmes almost 133 years of age. The elongated man is like, "It can't be, how is this possible?" And Holmes is like, "It's the cocaine, brother! It makes you live forever!" No, actually, Holmes attributes his longevity to eating right, taking royal jelly, and living in Tibet. Also, he quit smoking. Batman offers him a light, but Holmes insists that these days, the pipe is just for show. Holmes reveals that he's been on top of Edgar Moriarty's activities all along, and he's been assisting Batman from behind the scenes. He sent that tip to Commissioner Gordon that Batman mentioned in Chapter 1, and he came here because he suspected Inspector Foxborough was one of Moriarty's men. There's a nice moment between Holmes and Mary, Dr. John Watson's great-granddaughter. Holmes tells her, "I miss him to this day." Holmes also absolves Thomas Moriarty of any guilt he feels because of his family, telling him, "I'm glad to see the strain of evil is not dominant in your family. There would be no point in it all if we could not better ourselves, Thomas." And with that, Holmes thanks Batman and the others and leaves. The elongated man tries to stop him, wanting to ask him some more questions about, well, pretty much everything, but Batman says, let him go. He's earned his privacy. Mary and Thomas go their way, and Batman, Robin, the elongated man, and Slam Bradley walk off together, with Slam declaring that he's going to give up smoking too, and maybe then he'll live as long as Sherlock Holmes. Probably not. He's not only a regular smoker, he's also almost certainly an alcoholic. There's a heart attack in his near future, but it's nice to have goals anyway. And that's the end of the 50th anniversary issue of Detective Comics. Writer Mike W. Barr is sometimes a controversial figure. He's disliked for ignoring canon and continuity, for occasionally writing characters out of character. There's a panel in this book where Batman appears to pull a crook in front of himself to use as a human shield when another crook is shooting at him. Not very heroic, Batman. But I've always liked Barr's stuff. I couldn't care less about what's considered canon and what's not. And while beats like Batman using someone as a human shield definitely feel wrong to me, they're compensated for by Barr's inventiveness and audacity as a storyteller. His plot here is a bit complicated and preposterous, but that's because it needs to provide reasons for Batman and Robin and Slam Bradley and the elongated man, and Sherlock Holmes to all join forces on the same case. And in that sense, it works. The plot brings all those characters together and includes a pastiche of a classic Sherlock Holmes adventure that isn't exactly on the level of the best stories in the Doyle canon, but isn't bad. And it's all pretty contrived, but it makes sense and it's a fun read. And it's Batman meets Sherlock Holmes, for Christ's sake. I'd call that a thumbs up. For as complicated as the rest of the story is, an evil descendant of Professor Moriarty kidnaps the granddaughter of Dr. Watson, who is engaged to another not evil descendant of Professor Moriarty, and attempts to steal and or destroy the manuscript of a lost Sherlock Holmes adventure, recording Holmes's first encounter with one of Professor Moriarty's plots to prevent anyone from realizing that he intends to repeat that plot in an attack on the British royal family, which also involves planting a bomb in a copy of the Doomsday Book, while also simultaneously launching a nerve gas attack on London, for which he intends to blame his cousin, the not evil Moriarty descendant, all of which independently attracts the attentions of Batman and Robin, Slam Bradley, the elongated man, and Sherlock Holmes. When you lay it out all at once like that, it really is ridiculous, ain't it? But for as complicated as all of that is, I love how simple Barr's explanation for the presence of Holmes in the modern day is. He's just really, really old. This is the DC universe. Holmes could have taken a dip in a Lazarus pit, or acquired unnatural longevity through some other mystical means. There could have been time travel involved, like in the episode of The Brave and the Bold animated series, where Batman travels back to Victorian London and meets Holmes that way. Instead, Holmes turns up in 1986 in his 130s to help thwart the great-grandnephew of his old arch-nemesis and waves off his advanced age as the result of eating clean and getting lots of fresh air, basically. No big deal. The most preposterous thing in the story, and it has the simplest justification. Outstanding. Detective Comics has been synonymous with Batman for so long that it's easy to forget that originally its title actually described the content of the book. For its 50th anniversary issue, which was published almost 40 years ago, God help us, the sun will expand and envelop the earth any day now, Mike W. Barr and his collaborating artists found a way to celebrate everything that Detective Comics was, is, and would be. They told a story that touches back to the beginning of the book through the reintroduction of Slam Bradley, brings in the elongated man for some superhero silliness, reaches even further into the history of the genre to include Sherlock Holmes, arguably the strongest influence on all detective fiction that followed him, and ties it all together with the character who changed Detective Comics and helped to change comics as a medium permanently when he was introduced in 1939, Batman. All of which is terrific, all of which I appreciate, but let me be honest, the only reason I'm telling you about this issue is this right here. Batman meets Sherlock Holmes. To a kid who grew up loving Batman and an adult who has loved Sherlock Holmes for over 20 years at this point, that's the sweet spot. The Dark Knight detective meets, sorry Bruce, the world's greatest detective. In the pages of Detective Comics. That's a team-up that makes this story a worthy addition to any collection that seeks to chronicle the adventures of the best Batman ever.